I'm Anton Harber from South Africa. You're watching Africa.tv. From Africa, always something new.
Where did the idea come from? I mean, why the need for a mampoer shot? Why the need for this short length, something punchy?
You know, it came out of an event where I spoke last year at the Troyville Hotel Book Club.
Okay.
And I remarked while I was talking that I thought the big gap in South African journalism was that there was no outlet in between the 1,000-word articles you can write for some of the weekly newspapers and a book.
Yeah.
And I thought that there was a real gap in the substantial but less than a book kind of, I suppose, New Yorker type in-depth article, piece of journalism, reportage. And the host of the evening, Anthony Alsbecker, phoned me the next morning and said, "You're absolutely right, but can't we do it as e-publishing? Can't we do it on the internet?" And you know, I have an internet company with my long-standing business partner, Owen Manoyan. And we'd been talking about various publishing ideas over time, but we never felt it was ripe. And we discussed it that morning, and we said, well, maybe the time is ripe. Paywalls are going up, people are starting to pay, the need is clearly there.
Yeah.
And from there we decided to give it a go.
Wow. Do you, I mean, it's interesting you said you give its history in that way, because I wondered whether it was more looking at how literature is doing in South Africa and how writing is received and who's reading and what do people have time for. Like, I wondered if there was also a very measured, sensible, almost commercial approach to it as well, apart from the need for these kinds of things.
Oh yes, the commercial decision was, is the market ready to take the leap?
Yeah.
And we think we're early, but we think that the turnaround where people can and will pay for material of this sort is coming.
Yeah. And
internet penetration is growing to the point where there will be an audience.
Yeah.
And the economics of e-publishing just make this kind of publishing feasible.
Sure.
You know, the problem in this country, and I think for most of Africa, was that the market could never sustain a New Yorker type magazine.
Because of print form.
Because of the costs of print and distribution.
Yeah.
And e-publishing, the economics are entirely different. But we could make it local as well as appeal to a global market.
Yeah.
All the things the internet enables that makes it exciting.
Sure.
And I suppose part of it is that Owen, my business partner, and myself have always been really in the business of publishing quality, serious journalism of one sort or another. So we were looking for the opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you talk of the need for it. You have your idea of the need for it. Who are you writing for? Do you have who do you think is the person that buys the shorts? Do you have an initial idea and then you speak of a global impact?
Look, I think, you know, the material we're selling, we're saying must have a South African flavour.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, because they're very topical as well.
Yeah. Right. And so we see most of our audience being South Africans, but clearly there's a global audience both of South Africans around the world and people with an interest in South Africa or Africa.
Yeah.
And it's for the serious reader, you know, that's what we're aiming for. But we are thinking, I suppose with our commercial hats on, of the need to probably publish a wider range of more popular material.
Okay. Would you, I mean, the other thing I noticed is the writers are all, at the moment anyway, are South African.
Yes. And
I'm not saying that's deliberate, but I mean, do you see it as being something that Africans around the continent could contribute to, or in the diaspora?
Very much so. We started off saying, let's give this a South African flavour, because A, that's what we know.
Sure.
And that's the market we know. But I think one does have to be niched. You know, we don't want to compete, just just compete in the open market with the likes of Amazon, because we can't compete with them. So we say,
Yeah.
what is our niche? We would certainly like to develop a continental model as well.
Okay.
So when we say South African flavour, we hope to interpret that quite loosely, and we hope over time to think maybe on that site or in parallel sites a wider African view, because the need and the gap is there across the continent
Yeah,
as well.
it's not just in South Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned competing. Do you think, do you think that what you're doing is a competitor to journalism, to newspapers in South Africa? I mean, even though it's a different form, I mean, do you think that there's competition there, or is there some symbiosis that the two have?
No, I don't think it's competition in the sense that we're publishing things at a greater length than newspapers can consider. And in fact, a number of newspapers are quite keen and eager to work and cooperate with us.
Oh wow!
So
in what way would they do that?
Well, we for example, with the Sunday Times, we're looking at jointly commissioning a piece that's quite expensive to do because it involves travel to Europe.
Okay.
And the idea is we'll pay for it jointly. They will run what they can, which is maybe 1,200 words as a news piece, and we will aim to run a 5,000 to 10,000 word, much more substantial piece.
Yeah.
So we both gain out of it. We both save on the costs, and hopefully we kind of cross-promote each other as well. So that's an experiment we're looking at.
So it's actually a partnership.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
The choice for that it's non-fiction, I guess, because I'm a fiction writer, I'm curious. I mean, is that deliberate? There's also the notion that non-fiction sells better than fiction and all those kind of things. I mean, I'm just wondering, do you ever see it opening up to fiction?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We said let's start with non-fiction for two reasons. The first is that non-fiction does sell better in South Africa. And the second is it's what we know.
Yeah.
We're journalists. We're non-fiction writers, so we thought, well, let's start with what we know best.
Yeah.
But actually, we're thinking about fiction earlier than we'd anticipated. And I think there's real potential to look at a serial, for example. We would love to look and see if we can develop a market for a serial that publishes over a period of time.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just curious, why do you think non-fiction does well here? Why do you think fiction isn't like consumed?
I think because we have been so consumed by our social political situation in the last 20, 30 years. I think that's the main reason. I mean, we certainly have very good and interesting fiction writers.
So really, you think it's not because it's a different mode, or it's a different style and people can't engage with fictional stories. You think it's because people are bogged down with political matters, and so the books that come out like that are what catches their imagination.
It's the only reason I can really think of.
Okay.
Because I don't think we have a shortage of interesting, engaged fiction writers.
Yeah. Somehow, for some reason, it seems like it's not accessible. People don't see it as something that's accessible.
Yeah. Look, we don't have enough reading generally in the society. It's the most frustrating thing, and that's actually what we really need to address, because if you've got the readers, the writers emerge.
Yeah. Well, which is brilliant about this, I think.
I spent today interviewing aspirant journalists for entry into our journalism program at the university.
Okay.
And I can't tell you how many times today one question we asked was, what do you read? And you could look at what they'd written, and you could see who reads a lot and who doesn't, and just too many. These are people aspiring to be journalists and not reading enough.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a real frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. In terms of your role, particularly with mampoer Shorts, are you the editor? I mean, what role do you play?
Look, there's a collective of really 4 or 5 of us that have put it together.
Okay.
We're running out of the back of our internet publishing company, Big Media, which is a commercial internet publisher, which does kind of contract work. So that's providing the infrastructure to enable us to do it and keep costs low. But Anthony Altbecker, the author, the editor, and a very good editor, is the key commissioning person. He's taken on that role. But I've been doing some commissioning and some of the editing. Erwin, my business partner, is really he's the designer and the technical lead, who's put the site together. And he's a brilliant designer, and I think one of the strengths of the site has been design. And the managing director of the company, Noko Mahoto, is the kind of business. He does what managing directors do, which is to tell us to stop spending so much money.
Important role there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And we brought in Fred Withers, who's recently retired as the head of South Africa's biggest exclusive books, our biggest booksellers, because we needed somebody who knew more about book publishing than us journalists.
So it's almost like it's the dream team.
Well, I think it's
because you have all the right components to have it work, is what I'm saying.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
How did you, when you began, did you kind of pick authors? How did the initial, because you have a few books on sale already. What did you kind of pick the people you thought, and going forward now people can submit?
Yes, we said we have to start with some well-known, fairly established names. So in journalistic non-fiction circles, so we made a list, phoned a number of them. We were really surprised at how eager they were, how excited they were by the prospect. Wow. Yeah. Because to get it going, we had to pay some advances. Okay. I mean, in general, our model is to pay royalties to the writer.
Post.
That's correct.
Yeah. But no advance.
No advance except in exceptional circumstances where there's costs to be covered to get it done.
Okay.
But to get it going, we had to pay some advances, particularly to freelancers. And we were amazed. And now we've invited people to come up. We are setting out deliberately with a scheme to find new voices.
Yes.
Because we started with established voices and we need new voices.
Are you getting a response? Is there like people submitting?
People are submitting and we're pairing them with mentors.
Good.
And that'll take a while to roll out, but we've got some of those rolling out now.
Great.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So you mentioned that the funding is it's like big media is kind of responsible, because I'm going to ask how is it funded and how's it going? Are you making money?
We're not making money. We understand that it will take time.
Yeah.
Sales are moving, but we need more.
Yeah.
So we're funding it off the back of what is a commercial publishing company.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
For now, but it is a commercial venture, and we will need it in time to sustain itself.
And you're confident that it will?
No, it's a bold experiment.
Yeah.
We have to we have to get people in this country used to that length.
What do you mean by? I mean, because it's neither the book length or the...
Correct. We're saying here's something new. It's 5,000 to 10,000 words. We define it as a one-sitting read.
Yeah.
You can sit down of an afternoon or an evening, consume it in a couple of hours. That's our aim. But that's something fairly new in this country. And we're saying to people, pay not for a magazine or generally a subscription, but for one of those pieces.
Yeah.
At
a reasonable price. I think it's a...
Well, we've grappled with pricing.
Yeah, I wondered how you selected that.
Well, it was gut instinct in the end.
Okay.
And it's something we'll have to experiment and see what works. So our view is very much experimental. We have to experiment with length. We have to experiment with subject matter. We have to experiment with different writers. We have to experiment with different prices. We will start experimenting with subscription models.
Oh wow! Okay.
And models to enable people to give away subscriptions as gifts and things like that. We're thinking about whether we should sell. At the moment, we're just commissioning and selling. We're acting as the bookstore, the retailer, as well as the publisher and commissioner. We're wondering if we should break that up. So this is very new territory, and our view is what works we'll go with, what doesn't work we'll change.
When you say break that up, you mean in terms of the rights of the work?
Well, at the moment you can only buy them on our site. Should we make them available elsewhere, for example? Should we sell through other outlets? Shall we produce print versions which would cost more and
for
sell
people
those?
who for that market that actually want it? Where are the sales coming from? Would you say the majority? South Africa, I would presume.
The majority are South Africa. I think our figures showed that about 15 to 20% were coming internationally. It's been a huge learning experience for us because we're journalists and we've been publishers in print, but learning the internet and its scope as well as its limitations has been a real eye-opener.
It's a different animal.
It's a different animal altogether. And we're learning to tame it.
Well, I wish you all the best because I think it's very exciting.
Thank you.